Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present our project, Gudme, a building complex with an elite residency and workshops from 3rd to 11th century. This project is made possible due to a generous grant from the Carlsberg Foundation. The project is housed at the National Museum, and the research team consists of Research Professor Lars Jørgensen, Senior Researcher Helle Horsnes, Head of Environmental Archaeology and Material Science Peter Rasmussen, and they're all from the National Museum, then Curator Palle Østergaard Sørensen from Roskilde Museum, and then myself from the National Museum. And this is a 2-year project that started in 2015. We're working with one of Scandinavia's largest and most significant archaeological sites from the Viking Age, Iron Age and Viking Age. So that's 3rd to 11th century AD. Gudme is an elite residence located on eastern Funen, and this building complex is one of the richest at its time in all of Scandinavia. Especially in the period from the 3rd to the 7th century, there's a peak in the activities. At this time, there was an elite residence with whole buildings and nearly 50 smaller farms. And you can see this on the slide to the right. The halls in the middle, marked with an arrow, and the approximately 50 smaller farms are surrounding them. And this is the layout of the place in its heyday. 3.5 kilometers east of Gudme, the small trading center of Lundeborg, near the coast, has been located. The archaeological evidence indicates that various activities took place in and around the marketplace at Lundeborg in 3rd to 4th centuries AD, and this should be seen as an incorporated part of Gudme's functions. The area of Gudme covers 1 square kilometer and reached its peak in terms of size and activity in the period 200 to 600 AD. Approximately 6,000 prehistoric metal objects are found, and one of the special features of Gudme is that a large number of the farms show metal craft production consisting of goldsmith and silversmith work as well as bronze casting. In another part of the settlement, an aristocratic residence of the 3rd to the 6th century has been excavated, including 2 buildings of quite unusual dimensions. The largest of the buildings was an enormous hall measuring 47 times 10 meters. And then I've added a photo of a hoard found in 1990. It contains 1 scabbard fitting and 2 gold ingots, and the fitting is one of the relatively few traces of a warrior elite in Gudme, but it does nevertheless reflect the elite. Gudme is no new invention, though. The first documented finds from the area goes back to 1585, and since then the number of artifacts has increased, especially since the 1980s with the introduction of the metal detector. On the slide you can see one of these old finds. It's the so-called Boholm hoard that turned up in 1833. So there's been an awareness through the years that this area was a rich site containing prehistoric treasures. Then in the 1990s and forward, several excavations were carried out in combination with metal detecting. Especially Palle Østergaard Sørensen took part in these excavations, and he's also part of the research team, where he'll be publishing the settlement in regard to the house structures and the results from the excavations. So, in addition to being a celebrated archaeological site, Gudme is also the mother of all detector sites. The amount, the composition, and the quality of the metal artifacts from Gudme is extraordinary in an international perspective. In Denmark, it's perfectly legal to use metal detectors as long as you stay clear of the national heritage sites and you have an agreement with the landowner. If you find some antiquities, they must be handed over to the local museum. That'll send them to the National Museum to assess if they're treasure trove or not, Danefæ as it's called. So we have quite a lot of volunteers in Denmark with metal detectors, and a lot of these volunteers are actually very skilled. They're extremely good at what they're doing. And we've never had so many finds as we do at the moment. Literally thousands of metal artifacts are sent to the National Museum every year from the whole country. In Denmark, metal detecting all began in the 1980s, and one of the sites that enabled this development was Gudme. Because of the rich find material, a lot of new extraordinary finds were made, and that attracted enormous attention. And I think that's one of the reasons, or the main reasons, why this field of archaeology got on the right track from the beginning in Denmark. I'm working with the detector finds in order to create interpretation models for this type of archaeological material. Models that can be used when interpreting other less investigated sites. So that's why a lot of the slides will show you pictures of detector finds. In our project, we include the 6,000 finds that have been made with metal detectors in Gudme and the neighboring areas. And this is a screen dump from the database that shows you the majority of the finds and their distribution. Every dot refers to a metal object. So Gudme holds a special place in the history of metal detecting in Denmark and actually in the rest of Europe as well, as the Danish laws in this area are very liberal compared to other European countries where it's either prohibited or not that organized. So when looking at our research project in connection to the international field of comparable projects, the work with the detector finds is pioneering. The history of metal detecting in our field of research has resulted in a very large and well-documented bulk of material for our project. And the results will be beneficial for other projects working with metal-rich sites in both Scandinavia and in Northern Europe. But it will also have an impact on society for non-professionals, for all our volunteers that go hunting with their metal detector, as well as for others that are interested in prehistory. Finds of gold and silver and cultic objects are of great interest to the public. It has a touch of Indiana Jones and it attracts a lot of attention. And it will be of great value to get the complete and updated interpretation of this mythical place out to the public. So, to the left, you see a photo from the excavation of the largest hole at Gudme. The post holes from the roof-bearing posts of the magnet hole are marked with white chalk. And you can see one of the archaeologists standing in the hole, so to say. On the drawing to the right, this hole is marked by a red dashed line. From this hole, one could walk into a smaller building, and on the drawing, the area with the smaller building is marked by a green dashed line. These two buildings had a total internal area of 700 square meters. The largest hall building functioned for around 100 years, and in the beginning of the 5th century AD, it was demolished. After this, the smaller hall building continued to function until the middle of the 6th century. However, throughout this period, the building was taken down and rebuilt again several times. The function of the hall complex is unknown. However, when the main building's exceptional size is taken into considerations, as well as the many finds of a religious nature from inside the hall and the area around it, this suggests a magnet's residence with an associated cult building. In this project, we'll analyze and publish the archaeological site of Gudme. A number of important questions need to be clarified about Gudme's establishment, organization, and functions. Was the construction of the site a result of Roman influence? How was the economic and social development of the Iron Age and Viking Age? Did the significant changes in Gudme in the 6th to 7th century happen at the same time as changes in agricultural economy or social changes? These are some of our main questions. It makes Gudme special in a Scandinavian or even North European perspective that the site contains important information about the elite's increasing control and centralization of important elements like production, trade, and religion. This happens in the wake of the Roman Empire's impact on the areas north of the Rhine-Danube. All these functions are found at Gudme, and we see a clear link to the Roman Empire, among other things reflected in the Roman imports found on site. And to the left you can see one of these Roman artifacts. It's a small silver head with gilding, and it only measures a couple of centimeters, and its function's unclear. Another type of Roman import at Gudme are the coins. There's an unusual accumulation of around 1,000 Roman denaries and 300 silica, which Helle Horsnes is working with. And to the right, you can see the Gudme 3 hoard. It contained 293 Roman silver coins. Most of them are produced in the middle of the 4th century, and it was deposited sometimes in the 6th century AD. We only know a few comparable sites in Scandinavia, sites like Sortemuld on the island of Bornholm, and Ubokra and Helgö in Sweden. Gudme is well examined, partly because of the relatively extensive excavations that's been carried out, and partly because of the geographical information system that's been constructed throughout the last 15 to 20 years. This database contains all data from the excavations and thousands of metal objects. Gudme is one of the few Scandinavian sites where we have knowledge about both the structure and the organization of the site from elite level and right down to the farm levels in a long-term perspective. So the site itself and the collection of data through the years makes it a valuable place to carry out complex spatial and chronological analysis. In an international perspective, Gudme is important since it can serve as a model for the explanation of the functional and time-based development of what we can call the first generation of large multifunctional elite complexes, which tend to occur during the cultural and economic influence of the Roman Empire. It doesn't make sense to define Gudme as one thing, like a central place or the center of power or a religious epicenter, because the site contains so many different functions which were entangled and symbiotic. And some of the different functions are represented at different times. Gudme is a mixture of a lot of things, but the cultic or ritual element seems to be the fundamental component, and I'll get back to this in a minute. On the slide you can see a small hoard, probably a ritual hoard, containing some pieces of gold and jewelry and a small silver mask. It's a decorative mounting. And this hoard was found in one of the roof-bearing post holes from the Great Hall. In the following, I'll just highlight some of Gudme's functions, but it's important to bear in mind that the functions were entangled and that the religious aspect was ever present. One of the most obvious functions is the elite residence, and I showed you a photo from the excavation of the largest hall earlier. This is a photo of what it looks like now. After the excavations, the post holes were marked with wooden stumps so the visitors can get an impression of the size of the two large holes. The find material from the main building area is rich. Roman hack silver, bronze and glass objects, gold ornamented silver neck rings, silver figurines, and more than 50 denarii have been found. Within these enormous buildings, meetings between the Magnate and the Allies probably took place. Friends and foes from near and far could have met up to negotiate, to do politics and business, make arrangements for marriages and other important matters. Agreements could have been made and rituals could have been performed to seal the deals. And it's tempting to come up with even more suggestions for the past activities in the halls of Gudme. There's no doubt, however, that these Magnate halls had many essential functions that extended far beyond the local area and which contained many aspects of human life. In the area immediately southeast of the two large halls, there's a concentration of pits and cultural layers that contained find beyond the usual types from the 3rd to the 6th century. And you can see the post holes from the great halls marked in red, and the cultural layer southeast of these are marked with the green color. Lars Jørgensen argues that the finds from this cultural layer have been deliberately deposited. Several of the objects are exclusive items of jewelry and valuable metal. Lars Jørgensen points to several explanations for the existence of these deposits. On the one hand, they might represent primary offerings of valuables on the spot, or they might be the result of secondary deposition of the remains of meals and objects from rituals held in the hall buildings. So the cultic or ritual element seems to be the fundamental component in Gudme, both in the layout of the place and in the architecture, and this is reflected in the place names as well. Several of the place names near Gudme point towards the settlement functioning as a pre-Christian cult center. The place name Gudme means home of the gods, the nearby Gudbjerg means mountain of the gods, and the neighboring Galbjerg means the sacrificial mountain. At both the building complex and in the hinterland, a unique selection of hoards with gold and silver have been found. A part of this gold represents ritual deposits. Then, last but not least, we have numerous artifacts that mirror the presence of the cult. And on the slide you can see some of these. It's a photo from a prehistoric exhibition at the National Museum. And in one of the showcases you can see these different objects that are interpreted as belonging to the cultic sphere. This is a selection of human figurines and gold foil figures, but animal figurines occur as well. Some of the animal figurines are represented at this slide, along with some human masks. These are all detector finds, and they're all relatively small. They only measure a few centimeters each. Some of the animals are interpreted as bulls, and several of them have perforations by the ears where horns could have been attached. And this is just a small selection of human and animal figurines that can be related to the cultic sphere. As mentioned, we have massive traces of metalworking on the smaller craft farms. And in this respect, Gudme is a pioneer settlement because it introduces a new aspect of large-scale organized metalworking to the Scandinavian Iron Age society. After the 6th century, the elite residence seems to vanish and the amount of farms decline. The number of farms go from 50 to 10 or 15. On the remaining farms, however, metalworking continues. This major structural change on the Gudme settlement happens at the same time as the rise of a new type of elite settlement in Scandinavia, where sites like Sisø and Lejre on Western Zealand are established. One of the things we're going to examine is whether this significant reduction of Gudme reflects a reorganization of society. Despite this reduction in size, metalworking continues on-site, and some of the evidence of this is the vast number of fragments from Roman statues that are found here. And here you can see more than the 200 of the bronze fragments from destroyed Roman statues that have been located at Gudme. Sometimes it's possible to identify the different body parts or even the types of statues they derive from. And to the right you can see a Roman statue portraying Hercules. It's in the collection of Ny Carlsberg Glyptoteket. And to the left you can see some of the Gudme fragments placed on this statue. There seems to be a resemblance. One of the aspects we want to explore is whether Gudme represent direct or indirect contact with the Roman Empire. And in this connection, we need to look at these fragments, together with Roman coins and other Roman objects, to analyze whether Gudme's massive feature of Roman objects reflect a direct Roman interest in the area, or whether Roman material expresses recycling of scrap metal in the 3rd to the 5th century AD. So, to sum up, this site has many features of economic, religious and political character, just to name a few. Through almost 1,000 years, people have been present at this place where they've negotiated with their allies, with local and international contacts, and not least with their gods. The site is essential for the understanding of the Iron Age society in southern Scandinavia, and therefore it's rewarding that we in the coming year can continue our work with answering some important questions about Gudme's establishment, organization, and functions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Maria, for this report on the unique finds at Gudme at Funen. Does anybody want to pose a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Senior Pauli Jensen. I have a question regarding something you haven't mentioned and something that is not seen or perhaps is not there but must have been there. Armed forces. This is a tremendously rich site with gold and silver and elites. Where are the bulky men with arms? Where are the bodyguards? Where are the policing forces who keep sort of law and order here?
They must definitely have been there at some point. The problem, so to say, with Gudme is that the geology gives very poor preservation for iron. So a lot of the iron artifacts are in a very poor state, and some of them have just disappeared. I've just went through the material, and we have, I would say, 10 arrows of iron. And that's not much, but iron is not that well in this place.
And Birte?
Birte Poulsen. I was just interested, you have all these detective finds, but how often do you have the possibility of going back and say, we want to do an excavation here? How often did you do that? Do you have all these scraps, and what do you do with them then?
Well, all the scraps we of course pick them up and measure it and put it in our database with the GPS, so we know where it's found. And a lot of the metal is collected, or almost all the metal is collected by our volunteers. But they're very good at documenting where they found it and so on. But
so that means that you could go back and say, this is very interesting, now we want to do a
bit of the area by the two large halls, where actually there's a håndbold hall there now, and it was actually only found because GOG, which is apparently a very famous handball team, wanted a new hall for their ball game. So that was quite fun that we found some other halls there. So of course we can't excavate there, but a lot of the space around Gudme is agricultural, and so good possibilities for excavations.
There was a question for Jesper Carlsen.
Yes, I would like you to elaborate a little bit about the direct or indirect contacts with the Roman Empire, because the exhibition at Odense Bys Museer called The Roman Connection was very interested at the inauguration, because the Italian Vice Minister for Culture stresses that this shows the very strong elaboration and collaboration between Denmark and Italy, that is the Roman Empire. While the Danish Minister for Culture at that time, Marianne Jelved, just said that it was that Denmark always has been outside the European communication. So that was the same exhibition and the same material. Yeah. What do you think?
But it's the same with the research in Denmark. A lot of different opinions on that matter. But I think that we will have to look more closely to the Roman finds, and I'm especially looking forward to Helle Horsnæs's work with the coins, because I'm quite sure that a key to that question will be in the coins. So
there was one more question. Yes, you. And come first.
Yeah, Bjarne Grønnow. What happened after Gudme? You mentioned new centers on Zealand, on the island of Zealand, but are there any candidates of centers taking over in
You're thinking
in
about
Funen,
a new type of Tisø settlement?
Yes, I was thinking about new local kings and Funen or something like that.
I wouldn't dare to say anything about that at the moment, but we do in Eastern Denmark have all these nice sites like Lejre, Tisø, Toftegård, Ubåkra. It would be nice to have one in Funen as well. So I'll keep my fingers crossed.
And Jane? Just...
okay. Jane Pfeiffer, Saxo Institute, Copenhagen. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I'm just again so astonished about the size of these complexes in Denmark. At least as a classical archaeologist, I always imagined that it was sort of small scale. But I wanted to ask a question, and that's about the condition of the metal objects. Imports versus scrap for the value of the metal. Have they all been chopped up and redeposited, or can you say anything about whether some pieces were actually imported as artifacts?
They might have been, for instance, at the Bjørnebanken, we have probably a whole Roman silver plate, very big one, but it's been cut up for other purposes. But it must have arrived here somewhere in a whole, as a whole object. And we have some small Roman figurines as well that might have been arrived to the place as whole objects. So it's not all scraps and for reusing. Yeah. So.
And what about the shape of the hall? Does it reflect anything basilica-like or something?
I would see like a development of what we're used to in Scandinavia. So it's a Scandinavian building custom, but just large. No, I wouldn't say that.
There was one more question. You have.
Oh yes, I can ask. All those small depositions, you say they were deliberate. Could it in any way be related to the Greek-Roman tradition of depositing small valuables every day, or very special ones in sanctuaries simply?
It might reflect some sort of impulse in that way. You're talking about the cultural layer southeast of the halls, right?
I'm talking about all the metal detector finds as well as those
but
from the big hall itself.
It could definitely be deliberately deposited, but we have to bear in mind that we have a long tradition for deposition of artifacts in Denmark as well. It goes back to Stone Age. So the tradition's already here, but of course it could have somehow been influenced by Roman tradition or other traditions as well.
Yes, and Christina will have the honor of the last question.
Mange spørgsmål.
Tak. About the Roman connection, but there's still no evidence of any foodstuff being, there are no transport amphoras, there's very little ceramics, isn't there? Tiny fragments. At Lundeborg even, not from Gudme.
No, but it needs more work. Okay. The ceramics definitely needs more work, but I wouldn't count on it, no.